I'm Olga from Minerva, and today I'm going to be showing you how I made this wonderful dress. It is View C from the Vogue 1976 pattern. This is an easy pattern. It doesn't include any zippers, and although there are buttons, you don't have to make any buttonholes. So I would definitely recommend this for confident beginners. The pattern includes 3 views and it is quick and easy to make. The differences in each view are view A includes a ribbon tie detail at the collar, and then view B and C are very similar, but view C is a slightly longer design. Although this pattern is modern, it does remind me of 70s dresses. Having said that, I think that the start of this show today is absolutely the fabric that we're going to be working with. As you can see, it is a really colorful and textured print. This is from our Minerva Exclusive Viscose Challis collection, and it is called Brushstroke Blooms. It has the most wonderful drape, and it feels so soft and light. The lightweight properties of this viscose challis, when coupled with this gorgeous print, make it the perfect spring fabric for all your dresses, blouses, and even skirts. I used 3 meters of this fabric. You will also need some interfacing. I am using the Vieseline F220 light medium interfacing in white. This interfacing is one of my favorites, and I always have some on hand. For buttons, I am using the hemline round shank buttons in the color yellow. For this dress, we will also need some cording. Here I am using the Stéphanoise flanged piping cord in the color emerald green. This piping is 2 millimeters and I got 70 centimeters for this project. The pattern also asks for snap fasteners. I am using the Prim sew-on metal snap fasteners in gold. I am also going to be adding a Minerva Maker woven label to this garment. Last but not least, you will also need some thread. I used the Gutermann Sew All Polyester Sewing Thread in color 38. You will need 2 spools of thread. All these items will be linked below for you to buy them as a kit, so you'll have everything you need to sew along with me. And remember to save this video so you can sew along at your own pace. To prepare my fabric for cutting, I always bring the selvages together with right sides together. This makes the process of marking my fabric easier after I cut out my pieces. It is also a good tip if you keep a lot of fabric in your stash. Storing it with wrong side out means that the pretty parts of your fabric have less light and dust exposure. Prepare all the paper pattern pieces. Using regular paper scissors, cut out all the pieces you need for the dress in your size. In this case, we will be using pieces 1 to 5, 7 to 9, and 12 to 15. Fabric folded with right sides together and cut the paper pieces out of the fabric. Keep the grain lines indicated on each piece in mind. The grain line refers to the direction in which the threads of the fabric are running, or in other words, the weave of the fabric. Woven fabrics have a selvage that runs lengthwise on both edges of the fabric. Pattern pieces drafted for woven fabrics will have a line with an arrow at the end indicating the grain line. So this line should always run parallel to the selvages. It's really important that you respect the grain line because the way you cut your fabric will have an impact in the way that your finished garment moves and behaves and fits overall. Remember to also cut out the interfacing pieces. The pieces that need to be interfaced are pieces 1 to 5, 9, and 13. Double check on each pattern piece how many interfacing pieces you need for each. apply this interfacing, use your iron on medium heat and leave it for 8 seconds. Transfer the markings of the pattern onto the fabric. I did this using the heat erasable pen. I also did it after fusing the interfacing, otherwise I wouldn't be able to see the markings on the interfaced pieces. This process can be kind of tedious, but it is extremely important because accurately transferring the pattern markings onto the fabric means you will make for a better finished piece and will make your life a lot easier while you're sewing. So, when all of the preparation is done, we can actually get to sewing. With right sides together, pin the interfaced yoke front pieces to the interfaced yoke back pieces at the shoulder seams, matching the notches. Repeat this with the uninterfaced pieces as they will be used for facings. Stitch and finish the seams. Seam finishings are methods used to secure the raw edges of the fabric and help them look neat and prevent the raw edges from fraying. They also make your garments look a lot more professional and have a much longer lifespan. There are several methods of seam finishing, such as sewing over the raw edges using specific stitches or enclosing the seams in binding. In this video, I will be using my serger to overlock the seams and then press them. If you do not have a serger, you can use a zigzag stitch or an overlock stitch on your regular sewing machine, or any other seam finishing technique that you are comfortable with. But always press your seams. Next, pin the interfaced midriff front sections to the interfaced midriff back sections at the sides, matching the double notches. Again, repeat this for the uninterfaced sections to use as facings. Stitch and finish the seam. Then stay stitch the midriff pieces from the notch to the opening edges. Stay stitching is a technique that is most often used around curves to prevent distortions, seen as curves are usually cut on the bias and are going to be the stretchiest part of the fabric. It is also, in this case, a way to reinforce any seams. To stay stitch, sew 3 millimeters from the seam line in the seam allowance, usually 13 millimeters from the raw edge. Pin the midriff to the lower end of the yoke front, matching the large circle markings. This may seem a little confusing, but trust the process. Stitch that seam ending at the large circle. Then clip the midriff front seam allowance to the large circle. I left this seam raw for now, but pressed it. Repeat for the uninterfaced facing pieces. The loops for the buttons, cut the cording into sections of 6.5 centimeters or 2.5 inches long. We will use 5 loops for the bodice and then 2 for each sleeve. I found that the flanged part of the piping was too big, so I trimmed it down closer to the stitching. This is optional and it was merely an aesthetic choice for me. On the outside of the interfaced bodice, pin the loops to the right yoke and midriff over the small circle markings, keeping the raw edges even. I used Clover Wonder Clips for this as they make pinning the cording so much easier. The pattern here asks us to baste the cording in place, but I went ahead and used some wider stitches on my machine. I used the 4 to 5 millimeter stitch size. This just made it a little easier and faster to navigate the really thin cording. With right sides together, fold the left front extension on the fold line. Stitch the end with the square closed and trim. Turn it right side out and press. Then baste the raw edges together. Pin the left front extension to the bodice on the left side, matching the squares and keeping those raw edges even. And then baste that in place. With right sides together, pin the facing to the bodice, matching all the markings. Stitch the front edge, ending at the large circle markings. Finish that seam. Finally, understitch the facing. Understitching is a line of stitches that are sewn really close to the edge of a facing or lining to keep it from rolling towards the outside. It is very similar to top stitching. It is particularly useful when you are sewing around a neckline. It basically keeps the facing or lining firmly on the inside of the garment without the stitches showing on the outside. To understitch, first press the seam well, keeping all the seam allowance to the side of the facing. top stitching just the facing, stitch the seam allowance to the facing close to the seam. Finally, press that seam again. Then baste all of the remaining edges. We also have to reinforce the inner corner of the yoke front by stitching over the lines that we marked earlier and pivoting at the large circle markings. Then we're going to clip to the large circle and put the bodice to the side for now. Next, gather all the upper and lower edges of the bodice, front and back pieces between the small circle markings. Together, we will sew 2 rows of long machine stitches, the longest of your machine does. In my case, that is 6 millimeters, and we're going to do this without back stitching. Leave the tails of the thread long so that you can pull on them later. You'll notice the fabric immediately wants to gather. Then pin the bodice front sections to the bodice back at the sides and match the double notches. Stitch and finish those seams. can join the bodice pieces we just worked on to the lined bodice piece we started with. To do this, start by pinning the back to the yoke, matching the symbols. I like to pin from the outside until the gathers and then tie off one side of the gathering threads. Then I'll pull on the other side until the gathered piece is the same size as the other piece we're attaching it to. Tie off these gathering stitches and then adjust the gathers to your liking without having to worry that you'll mess up the sizing. Next, stitch that in place and serge the raw edge. Pieces, we have to sew the top just like we did it with the back, but also the side seams. Make sure you are matching the notches and take it slow around the corner. Serge these seams as well. Then pin the gathered bodice piece to the rest of the bodice along the bottom, matching the markings and side seams and adjusting the gathers just like we did before. Stitch that in place and serge. Finally, we'll press all of the seams, the upper and lower seams, toward the yoke and midriff, and the others away from the facing. Now we can get started on the collar. Turn in the seam allowance on the notched edge of the interfaced collar piece and press. I'm using a seam gauge, but you may use a measuring tape if you like. Then trim the pressed seam allowance. Pin the collar sections together, leaving the notched edge open. Stitch and finish the seam. Turn the collar right side out and press. Then pin the collar to the neck edge, matching the notches. Stitch that in place, keeping the pressed edge free. Then trim the seam allowance and press it toward the collar. Finally, slip stitch the pressed edge over the seam. Slip stitching is an effective and easy way to close up some discrete seams that for whatever reasons cannot be sewn with your sewing machine. It's invisible from the outside and very, very nearly visible from the inside, so it's a great way to close up this seam. This is also where we're going to be adding our Minerva label. To achieve this stitch, slide the needle through the folded edge, such as the pressed edge of the collar, and then pick up a thread from the fabric underneath, in this case the neck of the bodice, and pull through. When I got to the label, I first sewed it by hand to the seam allowance of the collar with a blanket stitch, and then continued slip stitching the pressed edge close. Now that our collar is complete, we can put the bodice to the side while we'll work on the sleeve. Start by gathering the upper edge of the sleeve between the small circle markings. sleeve seam, leaving it open from the large circle markings to the cuff. Make sure to match the notches. Stitch and finish the seam. Seen as the sleeve has the small opening at the bottom, I serged the raw edges of this seam separately to make the next steps easier. I then press those seams open. At the opening of the sleeve, we will make a narrow hem, tapering to nothing above the large circle marking. A narrow hem, sometimes called a rolled hem, is a hemming method commonly used for circular, round, or unusual shapes, and also for sensitive or very thin fabric. To make a narrow hem, first we will turn up the hem 1.5 centimeters. You may either press that or pin it in place. Next, we're going to tuck in the raw edge so the seam allowance gets folded in on itself. Then we'll stitch that seam, pivoting across the seam allowance 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch above the large circle markings. Here we will gather the lower edge of the sleeves between the stitching of the narrow hem. To prepare the cuff, turn in the seam allowance on the long unnotched edge of the cuff and press. Then trim the seam allowance. Pin 2 loops of cording to each cuff piece over the small circle markings, making sure the raw edges are even. Baste in place in the same way we did for the bodice. Then pin the cuff to the sleeve. The opening edges of the sleeve should be lined up with the circle markings on the cuff. Adjust the gathers in the same way we did for the bodice. Stitch in place and finish the seam. When pressing, the seams should get tucked toward the cuff. Then, with right sides together, fold the cuffs along the fold line and pin the edges closed. Stitch the ends and finish the seam. Turn the cuff right side out and press it in place. Then slip stitch the pressed edge over the seam of the cuff. With that finished, we can pin the sleeves to the bodice with right sides together, making sure to match the notches and markings. just the gathers at the top of the sleeve like we did for all the other gathers so far. When you're happy with the placement of the sleeve, stitch and finish the seam. Make sure to press the seam allowances towards the sleeve. I used a tailor's ham to help me with this. Now let's get started on the skirt. Trim the right side of the skirt front along the cutoff line indicated on the paper pattern if you have not done that already. Make a narrow hem at the skirt front opening edges. Then fold the left skirt front extension to the wrong side along the fold line and press that in place. Pin the skirt front sections together at the center front, matching the notches, and stitch. At the large circle marking, we will pivot and continue sewing to the edge of the extensions. Finish the seam and clip the seam allowance below the extension at the corner to the circle marking. Open out the extensions and gather the upper edges of the skirt front between the small circle markings and the center front marking. Then pin the skirt back sections together at the center back, matching the triple notches, and stitch. Finish and press this seam. Pin the back to the front of the skirt at the sides, matching the double notches, and stitch. Finish and press the seam. Then open out the skirt extensions and pin the skirt to the bodice, matching the seams, centers, and notches. Again, the gathers will need to be adjusted. Stitch that in place. Then stitch again 6 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch away in the seam allowance to reinforce the seam. Finish the seam, but don't press it yet. Turn the extension edges over the bodice along the fold line and stitch the tops along the waistline seam. Then, turn the skirt front extensions back the right way and pull the skirt and bodice apart to their correct positions. Here, make sure you press all those seams nicely, turning the seam allowance down toward the skirt. The dress itself is now done. All we have to do are the finishings. Use the button loops on the bodice to mark the position of the buttons. Then, sew the buttons in place. I like to anchor my thread in the fabric before I add the button. Repeat this for the buttons on the sleeve cuffs. Then, sew the socket section of the snaps to the left skirt extensions and the ball sections of the snaps to the right skirt extensions at the small circle markings. carefully, make a narrow hem at the lower edge of the dress. I serged the hem first to make sure the hem was even before I sewed it. So, as you can see, this dress is a really quick and easy project that looks a lot more complicated than it is. It doesn't have zippers, buttonholes, or darts, all of which are quite daunting for beginners. So I think this is a really good beginner-friendly project. Obviously, the Brushstroke Blooms Viscose Challis, our exclusive fabric, really adds so much texture and color to this dress. It really brings it to life, and it's such a beautiful print. If you want to see more vintagey makes of mine, you can follow me along on my Minerva.com profile, and you can actually make one yourself. It's completely free to create an account, and then you can add photos and videos of all of the things that you're making. You can also tag products that you're using so that other people can find them more easily. It's also just a great place to meet other like-minded people who are interested in the same things as you, and honestly, just a really good place to find sewing inspiration. If you do end up making this dress, please share that with us. We would really love to see your creations and your takes on this. As always, thank you so much for watching. We hope that you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.